Welcome to Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation with a changemaker working to accelerate the transition to a sustainable, carbon-neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. You know, we're in the middle of an economic downturn. It's novel in economic history because we see persistently low unemployment while interest rates continue to rise. That means that people are hurting financially, but not necessarily because they've lost their jobs. Instead, higher prices are making them think harder and longer about their spending. That's one of the findings of a new research report, The Cost of Buying Green, Part 2, from Deloitte, a global business advisory and financial services firm. And we're joined today by Naba Sengupta. He is Senior Manager at Deloitte Advisory's Sustainability, Climate, and Equity Practice. We'll be discussing what they found in the new consumer study. Deloitte has tracked consumer spending on sustainable products and services for the past 18 months. Over the last 12 months, spending on sustainable products has actually declined. However, it's a decline with a silver lining. Compared to other categories of spending, sustainability is holding up pretty well. That suggests we may be seeing the resetting of consumer expectations. This raises several questions that we'll talk about, including whether the green premium, the added cost of sustainable products to get added environmental benefits, is growing or shrinking, and whether consumers are getting the information they need to recognize not just a good deal for themselves, but also for the planet. You can learn more about Deloitte at Deloitte.com. That's spelled Deloitte for you, those of you who are taking notes. And of course, we're going to include links to the research discussed in the article that accompanies this podcast. Now let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Naba. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Mitch. How are you?
Well, doing great. Thank you for joining us. I was really interested to read the report. It's the second in the series. And I wanted to start off by just asking you to summarize what you found. That 4 out of 10 consumers surveyed had purchased sustainable products in September 2022. How does that compare to 6 months and a year ago? What's changing?
That's a great question, Mitch. So based on our understanding and the finger on the pulse, so to speak, in the industry, we have seen that there have been certain shifts over the past 6 months to a year. We had issued a different paper, which was again focused on the consumer industry. It was called Accountable Sustainability in the Consumer Industry in March of 2022. So it's a great look back. And in the March timeframe, when we had issued that report, we had seen 6 to 10 consumers had changed their behaviors to help address climate change. And there was also about half of consumers who had provided their feedback were keen on making a sustainability-based purchase. So what that boils down to is that in the past 6 to 9 months, we are seeing that consumers have shifted from wanting to make a purchase or changing their behavior to actually purchasing sustainable products. And I think that's telling overall in terms of where the market is moving.
Now, how do consumers define sustainable products? What factors do they consider to make the biggest difference? Is it the use of recycled materials or renewable materials, renewable energy in production? Do you have a sense of what the values they're seeking to exercise in their purchases are?
Sure. So a definition of sustainable products is really dependent on which type of product or even which type of industry we're talking about.
Sure.
So there are some nuances over there which are very focused on the sector. For example, if you're talking about the beauty sector, most of the attributes over there are around the brand doesn't harm animals or is cruelty-free, or sustainable packaging, sustainable materials or ingredients. And of course, it's clean or it's free of harmful chemicals. When we shift to the food industry, as an example, it's all about labeling, the transparency of labeling, what are you including in the product, as well as certain attributes about how it improves the environment in terms of following circular practices. So most consumers are very oriented towards this when they are looking at the description of a product, or even broader than that, when they're looking at engaging with a brand, they're looking for resonance on some of those attributes, which are very important to them from a buying decision mindset.
Now, I remember the 1970s and the gas crisis back then. And as a result, a lot of behaviors changed in terms of driving and expectations about miles per gallon and so forth. And some sustainable decisions in the face of inflation, like cutting energy use, eating less meat, reducing food waste, go hand in hand with tough times. Do you see those changes becoming enduring habits because of the crunch, the economic crunch we've been through since the beginning of the pandemic?
That's a great observation, Mitch. And obviously, the overall macro environment is very cyclical. We have all seen repetitions of that. We've also seen how it impacts buyer behavior longer term. I think the current cycle is starting to show that there are certain aspects which are better for both, better for your personal budget from a consumer behavior perspective, as well as better for the environment and for the planet. What we are seeing overlaid on top of that is the decisions are also driven by certain aspects about your feel good factor. How do you feel that your active decision that you're taking in purchasing a product or selecting a brand is also helping in terms of elevating the impact that you have in the overall planet? And you have that hit of the feel good factor impacting your decision as well. When we talk about the current environment, the tough times that some of the areas of society are facing, you'll see that the first direct focus is really about reducing energy consumption. And what we have seen is that a lot of the power companies are offering products like eco-friendly smart home objects, or ESHO as we call it. So there are some options by which consumers can track more effectively how they're reducing their energy use. Over time, it ingrains into their behavior. How can they moderate that using maybe a smart thermostat or smart sensors? And the purchasing decision is not very hard to achieve. A lot of these are subsidized through some of the credits and incentives that are provided either at the federal or the state level. So what we are really seeing over here is that companies and organizations are providing more opportunities to ingrain more sustainable practices in your day-to-day life. And that is really something which can be sticky as long as consumers feel that they are not having to go out of their way to consciously embed this as an enduring habit.
That raises a really interesting question. Your point about the feel-good sense that we get, and what you said previously about the need to provide more information. Your data shows that people specifically are spending more time preparing to shop. They're planning and trying to purchase more intelligently. How do you recommend that brands communicate what can often be highly technical information in ways that are both authentic and true without greenwashing, and compelling enough to make somebody potentially overlook the higher price of a green product?
That's a great question, Mitch. So most of the time, the way that we look at consumer behavior through our studies, and we have a study like the Global State of Consumer, which refreshes on a monthly basis, that Deloitte focuses and invests in, as well as the work that we do with organizations in the consumer industry. We see that drivers over here are really veering towards authenticity, like you mentioned, clarity, and transparency. Now, when I say clarity, it's really about having a clear message of what your brand stands for and reflecting that in the product portfolio that you're actively engaging and selling in the marketplace. And when I talk about transparency, when we talk of an example like the food space, it's about transparency of labels. What you're putting into your product, how is that impacting or benefiting your health, and what are the conscious decisions that your consumers should be aware of so that they can make an informed decision. When we are looking at this as well from the context of reducing carbon footprint, I would say that somewhere between 35 to 40% of US consumers feel that corporations, when they claim authentic commitments towards environmental sustainability, then they feel a sense of belonging. They feel a sense of taking a step towards that particular sustainable brand. So To sum it up, when we are talking about this, clean labeling, transparency in ingredients or products, and then showcasing some of the healthy attributes, these would be some of the traits that organizations should think about from a differentiating standpoint.
Let me ask a little more about that, and this may be a step too far. When people look at the carbon footprint information that you're describing, are they primarily thinking about the carbon footprint of the business? They want it to be lower, or are they thinking about how the product lowers their carbon footprint? Do you have a sense of that?
That is an interesting question. Definitely depends on the sector that we are talking about. Let me give an example of the travel industry. Mm-hmm. When consumers make an active choice or a decision to take a more sustainable means of travel, then they're looking at their own footprint. A lot of the leading airlines nowadays offer that choice of offsetting your carbon footprint based on certain purchases that you're making, which goes towards buying sustainable aviation fuels, as an example. So that's where the consumer is conscious about their own impact from a carbon footprint. Counter to that, in the food industry, when some organizations are putting what is the carbon footprint of a particular product, they are factoring in the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 carbon emissions that are tied to the particular product or the product portfolio. And that becomes a decision point for consumers that product A versus product B have a certain amount of carbon attributes to it. And by choosing one over the other, I can make a decision on how much carbon emissions are going out there. And hopefully that translates into voting, as you might want to call it, by your wallet.
So the other finding, and I think this is true almost all the time, that Deloitte has reported, is that price is always the critical factor in the purchase decision. Consumers believe green products are consistently more expensive, but do you see, as you watch the evolution of sustainable production, the green premium decreasing as production of sustainable products increases? In other words, are we achieving some scale that is lowering the price?
That's a great point, Mitch. And we are seeing similar trends in the marketplace as well. When we compared this with maybe 10 to 15 years ago, the green premium was significant, partly because industry was really starting to go on this journey of sustainability and incorporating sustainable practices in their operations, in their product portfolios, and what they take in the marketplace. And partly because innovation had not really caught up. When we're looking at the position right now, you're seeing that organizations that are consciously incorporating sustainability into their ethos or into their corporate culture, they're distilling those same values and bringing it down to the products that they're selling in the marketplace. And the investments that they have made over the past 5 to 10 years in making their operations more green, working on whom are they doing business with, extending their corporate values around sustainability to their third parties, to their stakeholders, and making conscious attempts at reducing the footprint from a transportation standpoint as well. All of that is paying off. This is not a journey which can be surmounted in just in a day or even a year. It requires some sustainable commitments towards this. And those brands that have been on this journey for 10 to 15 years are starting to see that the green premiums are reducing. And it's also helping them in being more operationally efficient. So I would say that the benefits are on both sides, companies as well as the consumers who are not having to pay a green premium, which is significant. It's helping them in incorporating this. And as you had said earlier, becoming an enduring habit.
Now, the other thing that's happened, obviously, over the last couple of years is there's been a great deal of energy, fossil fuel energy price inflation. Does that potentially mute the difference in cost between traditional and sustainable products? And is it potentially opening the opportunity for consumers to try things that they previously would have thought were too expensive, but now are comparable or even potentially less expensive than a fossil fuel-driven product?
So the way to think of this, and maybe I'll characterize it slightly differently from how you were describing it. There are differences in how consumers are perceiving their impact from a societal perspective on the environment, and how much power do they wield in making these sustainable choices as well. What we are seeing is that there are certain demographic attributes, especially around Gen Z, where they're starting to realize the positive impact that they can make. They are also starting to be drivers of the purchasing decisions that they're making. And obviously, from a longer term perspective, over the next 20 years, Gen Z would become the most significant generation in terms of purchasing power, in terms of the buying behavior, and in terms of who these organizations would be positioning their green products towards as well. So when I think about it from the longer term horizon, I would say that there are certain demographics, or there are certain age groups that are really starting to make sustainability as a primary decision factor, versus those that still put price as the first decision or choice. And then further down the list, after maybe convenience as well as resonance with a brand, the fourth criteria may be sustainable practices by that particular organization.
I think your point about the multi-generational nature of this transition and the fact that it takes a long-term commitment by companies is critical for us to keep in mind. This takes patience. I want to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back to continue the conversation. We're back, and we're going to talk more with Naba Sengupta. He's Senior Manager at Deloitte Advisory Sustainability, Climate, and Equity Practice. And we're talking about the recently released The Cost of Buying Green report. Now, Naba, 42% of Deloitte's State of the Consumer Tracker respondents said they were in worse financial shape than a year ago, but we're seeing inflation declining. In fact, the day before we are recording this show, the Fed announced only a 25 basis point increase, indicating that they see potentially an end to tightening this year. Does this bode well for sustainably made product spending in 2023 even, and looking further out into 2024?
So that's a great question, Mitch. Obviously, keeping in mind that broader macroeconomic forces are a little hard to predict.
Sure.
From this perspective, I think what we can go back to is some of the enduring nature of the trends that we are seeing over here. We revisited that some of the trends that are being set in harder times, for example, energy conservation or shifting of your travel choices, or even the buying behavior of which brands you're choosing, tend to be sticky. They might start with a price conscious decision, but as you see that there are longer term benefits towards health, towards habit shifts, towards even the feel good factor that we talked about, those become enduring, they're set in stone. Similar to that, now if we are seeing that longer term, there is a certain amount of easing, and we are seeing that there would be certain aspects where the same consumers would have a little more leeway in being able to spend in the marketplace, maybe even shift towards more aspirational aspects. It's really about bringing all of that into the core decisions that you're making, as well as bringing that into the broader understanding of what a sustainable product is. There are definite aspirational aspects to sustainable products. For example, green living, the circularity concept, thinking about how your footprint can be measured, how you can optimize your behavior, and of course, the perception that consumers have that they're paying with their wallet, but they're also voting for certain brands and certain commitments to be over time resonating in the marketplace. So I think those broader contexts are what will come into play as we start seeing maybe some of the economic headwinds going away and consumers being able to ease their purchasing decisions as well.
There were a couple of other Deloitte reports that just recently came out. One was the Circularity Gap Report 2023, which was released at the Davos World Economic Forum meeting in January. And it reports that the global economy is actually a little less circular than it was before the pandemic. You say that it went from 9.1% circular in 2018 to 7.2% today, this year. And there's a second report. It was a perspectives article about the circular economy's relationship to local production, which is a widely stated consumer value. People want to buy local. Do you see a reorientation of supply chains going on in response to some of these consumer demands?
That's a great question. And it's a good observation as well, Mitch. So there are certain conflicting observations depending on the geopolitical environment that we are living in. Obviously, we are aware that there are certain conflicts, there are certain tensions that are happening, there are certain polarizations as well globally, which impacts the globalization phenomena. So no one is discounting that globalization is here to stay. There are global supply chains that are highly complex and it's very difficult to unwind. However, what we are seeing is maybe there are a couple of observations here on how this is translating into local behavior. Mm-hmm. The first is the overall policy position that some of the regions or countries that are taking a stand around sustainability. There is an impetus towards sourcing locally, reducing the span of your supply chain, looking at decisions by which you can produce locally, you can help your local communities, and you can reduce the carbon footprint at the same time. In those cases, as it plays out and as policy and government encouragement continues, we would see that there would be a certain reorientation or recalibration of the supply chain. In other respects, a lot of the developing countries as well as the large developed countries are investing in infrastructure so that even if you have a globalized supply chain, it becomes a lot more scale, which helps you in reducing your carbon footprint, your impact on the environment. Take, for example, the growth story in Asia or the emerging nature of Africa. A lot of the investments that are happening now would ensure that globalization of supply chain continues to remain, but you'll start seeing that the scale at which all of these are put in place and the infrastructure in mind is green oriented. How can they reduce their overall carbon impacts? How can they use more effective means of transportation and the future of mobility to be able to achieve both ends, be able to span a global market, but also reduce the carbon footprint and emissions as well. So I think it's a bit of both. It's the encouragement of policy and government to be able to produce locally, help local communities. And it's about the infrastructure investments that are happening right now so that the large-scale global supply chains that are enduring would also be oriented towards green standards.
So what is the timeline for seeing the impact of the investments that are clearly accelerating around sustainable manufacturing and distribution, actually making the market more circular, bringing it back up to and past the level we were at 2018?
So these are pretty long-term from their perspective and from the timeline that we're looking at. And that is partly, again, going back to the earlier conversation we had, it's about the time it takes for industry to recalibrate, the time it takes for policy to solidify and provide the incentives. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US is a significant legislative action, and the impacts of this would be far-reaching. It would also take some time for it to percolate. And then the third aspect is really about the innovation ecosystem catching up. Right now, we see many startups that are operating in this space trying to solve for these global challenges, but it requires the scale, it requires investment, it requires financial backing as well to be able to get to the point that it can make a significant impact. So I think broader, when we are looking at this, a lot of this is also reflected in the Paris Accord. A lot of it is reflected on some of the conversations that are happening at World Economic Forum or at the United Nations. It is a long game. finally. We are looking at sweeping changes for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And people need to realize and temper their optimism. But I'm inherently a very optimistic person. So I feel that as long as people realize that it's a long game, but there are incremental steps that we can all take, whether we are decision makers at an organization or we are buyers who are voting with our wallet, I think we need to realize that there are incremental steps that we are taking right now to be able to embed longer term impacts on the environment.
I heard a phrase that I think encapsulates this kind of optimism the other day. It's from the philosopher Slavoj Žižek. He describes it as cruel optimism, which means you have to make some hard choices. There's real work involved. It's not just feeling happy about this. The circularity gap report also made a great point that I think is important to focus on, which is that if we can get to a fully circular economy that will be using at least 30% less raw ore and other materials, which would potentially put us back within the world's ability to support us on an annual basis without depleting it, is what we've been through and what we're still dealing with right now, potentially the great reset moment. Is that something that we can, although it has to be cruelly optimistic, take some hope in?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that the business of protecting, preserving, and nurturing your planet is a long game. You need to be inherently optimistic when you're thinking about sweeping changes. You're thinking about reorienting the decisions that were taken over the past many years from the start of the Industrial Revolution. And you're thinking about reorienting towards a future post-industrial revolution, so to speak. So obviously, it's a long game which requires that inherent optimism. But there are some telling stats which dampen our enthusiasm. For instance, the latest reports around this talk about the resource consumptions that we have and the way that it's continuing to grow. If it's not kept in check, then it would require 1.7 Earths to be able to fulfill the amount of consumption that we have. That requires a long, hard look at what we are doing. How sustainable is it? And what can we do in terms of tempering our expectations of growth, in terms of just aspirations being linked with consumption patterns? All of that needs to be looked at long and hard. And the good thing is that we are all in this together. Whether we like it or not, we are all a part of the same planet. We have to take conscious decisions around this, whether it's incremental, whether it's transformational. We can all take some optimistic thoughts and behaviors around this because we are all in the driver's seat. There's no one else who's driving the car down the road. It's us. We have to think about what are we doing at each incremental moment. And as long as the road or the path ahead is clearly laid out and there's transparency around what we are doing, what are the initiatives, how it's going to be benefiting or how it's going to be impacting us in the short term in those hard decisions that we need to make, I think there is a greater level of understanding and buying in that consumers will do, so long as they know and they have that level of trust in the structures that are being put in place.
That really brings the point that we often talk about on this show out, which is we have to co-design this future. You just described a dialogue. How do you recommend, what does Deloitte advise companies to do to participate in a dialogue with their customers in order to find this new future and the way forward that those customers will support financially?
That's a great point. So when we work with our clients and we speak to them about the tangible steps they can take, some of the considerations obviously are around how we can temper it based on the level of maturity. There are certain organizations and certain sectors that have been on this road for a significant period of time. And there are certain others that are just starting to warm up to the distance that needs to be traveled. So the 5 things that we typically advise our clients, and it's a part of our 5x5 series in the consumer industry by Deloitte. The first is around baking it into your strategy. Organizations need to realize that there is a commitment that they need to make. It needs to be a part of the organizational ethos, values, and their strategy, so that there are time-bound targets and key performance indicators that they have to go on this journey and stay the journey. The second is getting your data right. Inherently, the transparency that you need around this and the buying in that consumers would have in terms of the value proposition that you have for your products, your product portfolio, and your organization requires that level of transparency and requires your data to be right. So investing the time and effort towards getting the data right and being able to have transparent disclosures is a very important step. The third step is choosing your companions wisely. So think about the organizations that you're doing business with. Think about the long-term factors that impact whom you are sharing your values and culture and ethos with. And it obviously goes into diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects as well in working with minority-owned organizations, supporting local communities, so on and so forth. The fourth is about telling your story. So companies need to realize that if they made a commitment, they are ingraining that into their organizational value. They need to think about how that percolates into their product portfolio. How do they stay transparent and authentic with their consumers on this is the journey, this is where we feel that we want to be, this is the aspirations that we want to share with you, and sharing that enthusiasm so that consumers feel that this is an enduring change in their mindset as well that they want to make. And the last point over here, the fifth point, is really about being innovative. So when you want to make sweeping changes around the net zero economy, whether you're talking about circularity or circular supply chains, you have to take incremental as well as transformative steps. The transformative steps is around how can you look at carbon optimization, how can you also look at carbon monetization. Carbon monetization is really about how do you invest into those practices which bring down your carbon footprint, as well as in some cases start pulling back the carbon from the environment. So monetizing that and being able to invest from a financial perspective towards those longer term plays requires innovative and transformative approaches. So those are the five guiding points that we usually share with our clients as they're going through the journey.
Thank you. That's very useful information. Now, on the other side of the conversation are the consumers. Not all of them are going to get a chance to respond to a survey, which companies will read, and certainly none of them are going to get invited to Davos. So what is your advice to a consumer who wants to contribute to this resetting of corporate priorities? How would you suggest they act?
Sure, Mitch. So I would say that consumers should not feel daunted that they are just one individual versus an entire organizational structure. It's really about, firstly, finding the values that resonate with you. It could be about water conservation, it could be about reducing your energy consumption, or it could be about, let's say, electric vehicles, that my next car is going to be an electric vehicle and I'm going to make a conscious decision and I'm going to save for it. So it's really about finding your passion points and reflecting that so that it's a part of who you are. It's a part of your identity. The second part, like I mentioned, is really voting with your wallet. When you have a decision point to make on what brand to align with, what product to buy, which aisle in the grocery, in the neighborhood grocery store do you want to go towards, and which brands do you support or amplify in your social media channels. All of that is conscious steps that you're taking to vote with your wallet and vote with the power of the dollar. And then finally, it's really about engaging with your local communities. Just like organizations have a responsibility in engaging with their local communities, so too do consumers. Ultimately, you're living in a community where you can make conscious steps in being a good neighbor, in thinking about the environmental impact, and in being able to amplify that message so that everyone around you as well connects with you on those common passions, those shared passions, and you can use that to make a lasting difference beyond the one person that you are.
I'm encouraged because you just described what your findings seem to suggest people are doing. They're doing more homework and so forth. Thank you very much for spending time with us today. One last question. Are you going to continue to update the cost of buying green report, and how can folks follow along if you do?
Absolutely, Mitch. So the cost of buying green report is going to be periodically updated. We would continue to be committed towards the consumer industry. Deloitte looks at our responsibility as corporate stewards very seriously. Hence, we are a part of a lot of the task forces. We are a part of signatories of the Paris Accord. And of course, there are significant areas where we are investing in just bringing visibility to some of the trends happening in the industry as well. Along with the cost of buying green report, we also have the global state of the consumer tracker, which has been ongoing and updated on a monthly basis, which gives you a finger on the pulse of how the consumer's buying behavior, purchasing decisions are shifting over time. This global state of the consumer survey is fielded monthly in 24 countries. And there's an ongoing tracker around this that you would find on the Deloitte website as well. Those two would be continually updated, and I'm hoping that that people who want to engage but feel the need to continue to stay up to speed on industry trends can utilize those as effective resources.
Well, Naba, thank you. That was very informative, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you so much, Mitch. Truly appreciate it.
We've been talking with Naba Sengupta. He's Senior Manager at Deloitte Advisory's Sustainability, Climate, and Equity Practice. In addition to the cost of buying green report, Deloitte consumer spending tracking and other research is consistently interesting and useful. We'll provide links to them in the article that accompanies this podcast. So what did we learn? Information is the key to the transition to a circular, sustainable economy. Companies are hearing from firms like Deloitte that customers like us want changes, and consumers are sending more messages by voting with their money for sustainable options. Yes, it's only 4 in 10 today. It was a little higher before the recession, or at least the downturn, whatever we have. But we have an opportunity as a society to make this change, and clearly we're approaching the permanent halfway mark. I don't think the green premium is going to remain a problem. It's not permanent. And as making more sustainable products becomes more prevalent, prices will continue to fall to parity and below the cost of traditionally manufactured wasteful products, just as has happened in the renewable energy market already. The key idea to take away from Naba's comments is pretty simple. Take the time to understand the environmental outcomes you want and the information you need to know, so that you choose products and services that contribute to achieving your goals and society's goals of living through the climate crisis and returning to a sustainable world. The long view shows that the transition is beginning to gain significant traction. It's never as fast as we'd all like on all or even any particular point, but change takes time. We need to be cruelly optimistic. It's a phrase that encapsulates the problem of being human at any time in our history. We live in challenging times. So did our ancestors. They got through it. We have to get through it too. And if we're cruelly optimistic, I think we will. Would you take a few minutes to share this conversation or any of the more than 370 episodes of Sustainability in Your Ear with your friends, family, your neighbors, your coworkers? Show your boss. You're the amplifiers that spread the ideas that lead to a less wasteful world. Let folks know they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of the other fine purveyors of podcast goodness that you like. And please leave us a review. It really helps get people to pay attention. We appreciate your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. We'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet. Have a green day.